Hi, everybody. If you watched the first video, as you should watch and do everything in order in the module, I kind of maybe got a little bit ahead of myself when I was talking about some of the topics that are going to be in the readings for this week, and the topic of policing online speech and the idea of content moderation and whether or not content moderation should be regulated, or online platforms should be regulated for any number of reasons, regulated like the government passing laws to control or monitor them. So I wanted to do this video presentation like I did for the first week, and kind of introduce this topic to you. Now, this topic, it was introduced, it leads directly from the last topic, which was defining fake news. We talked a lot about what fake news is. And by the end, we were talking about what should be done about fake news. Now, we get into the question of what should be done about fake news, then there's this whole snarl of social issues and political issues that you're going to see. It's a bigger problem than you may have thought. So I have a presentation I want to give. Let's see here. So I got these different windows. Hold on a second. Let me share my screen. Okay, let's start this presentation. Put myself up there in the corner. All right, policing online speech, the debate surrounding content moderation. So at the end of move myself a little bit, the end of the second reading in week one, which was the Hunt Alcott and Matthew Genskow reading, social media and fake news in the 2016 election. There's this quotation in that last paragraph that really kind of sets up this topic. They say, in practice, social media platforms and advertising networks have faced some pressure from consumers and civil society to reduce the prevalence of fake news on their systems. But identifying fake news sites and articles also raises important questions about who becomes the arbiter of truth. Now, let me see if I can, yeah, here's that reading and that quotation here. It's really this last paragraph, which says, to the extent that fake news imposes social costs, what can and should be done? That's really the question. What should be done about fake news? It's talking about, some of this economic stuff again. Social planner want to address market failures again. This article, some of this material is useful and some of it's not when you're not talking about economics. So yes, starting here, in practice, they've faced some pressure from civil society to reduce the prevalence of fake news on their systems. For example, both Facebook and Google are removing fake news sites from their advertising platforms on the grounds that they violate policies against misleading conduct. Okay. Furthermore, Facebook has taken steps to identify fake news articles, flag false articles as disputed by third-party fact checkers, and show fewer potential false articles in users' news feeds, and help users avoid accidentally sharing the articles by notifying them that this story is disputed by third parties before they share it. It seems like a pretty good practice. But again, identifying these may raise important questions about who becomes the arbiter of truth. Is this giving Facebook too much power to decide what is true and what is not? What is fake news and what is not? Also, does it give them too much power to silence people and suggest that you're spreading fake news, and so you're going to be kicked off of social media? Would this be an infringement on their freedom of speech? This is the kind of question that gets brought up in in this topic. It's a very kind of a big question and big topic. So, reasons for regulating the internet. What reasons do we have for regulating the internet? Why would the internet why would it need to be regulated? What's the reasons why the government should pass laws? Again, when I'm talking about regulation, I mean laws are being passed. There's monitoring that's happening. Some legal, some government body is put in place to monitor these companies in certain ways. Some things that will get raised up in some of the readings, some ideas that get raised in the readings that we will have is that consumer safety is something. There's the idea that if if there are problems that get caused specifically for consumers and putting people in danger or anything like that, that if it's harder to deal with after the fact and it would be better dealt with before the fact, then there's an argument that some sort of monitoring or regulation should be put in place to prevent things from happening. Privacy issues. So privacy issues are a big one in our society today. We're talking about people spying on you, talking about the who's spying on you through the internet. Is it the government? Well, okay, if it's the government, then is the government who should get involved with trying to ensure privacy? I'm not sure. The whistleblower Edward Snowden would probably disagree and say we don't want to give the government more power. Is it the social media companies themselves? How are they invading our privacy? This is a topic actually that we're going to be bringing up in the midterm, which we'll talk about information gathering, data collection, whether or not we are being spied on through our phones. National security issues. People are radicalized online. There are terror organizations that are online. The fact that some believe fake news actually can influence our democratic process and derange the results of an election and make it so actually affecting the results of an election and allow foreign powers to interfere in our election process. Is this a national security issue? Is this a reason for the regulation of the internet? Now, have we had regulation in the internet before? We certainly have had regulation in the internet. It is a form of media, right? Not just social media, but the internet generally. It is a form of media, and we have had a long history of media regulation. There's been a long we've as long as there has been mass media, there have been laws that control it. Now, the Bill of Rights guarantees a freedom of the press, and there are certain laws that have been passed because of certain events, like the leak of papers, government papers, like the Pentagon Papers. There have been regulations put in place and laws put in place that protect journalism and newspapers specifically, so that government can't pass laws that restrict journalists and things like that. But the same is not, it can't be said for other forms of media. We have the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, I think it is, that it is in charge of regulating things like broadcast radio and television. And we have had laws in place for radio. There was something called the Fairness Doctrine for a while that talked about how you need to have equal time. If you give time to one political topic or one political side, you have to give equal time to the other. And they found that this had an effect of chilling free speech, like, well, the radio and television, for example, they time is money, that the airtime is important for advertising, and that's how they make money. And so if having someone go on and express a political opinion or make a political argument meant they then had to devote the same amount of time to someone saying the opposite. They were less likely to allow anyone to make any political arguments or say anything political on the air at all. And so it had this kind of this effect that it was chilling free speech, meaning just discouraging speech online. And this is something that comes up along the way with the internet as well. There's the fact that being liable for what you put on the air, or the kind of what you put in your media, the content of your media, makes these organizations, these companies, sometimes less likely to want to allow political speech, or less likely to want to, control what's in it, which is something that we'll see later. Television is highly regulated, right, as far as content, what you can and can't say in the broadcast television, although cable television disrupted that, kind of mixed it up. And then, of course, now the internet is the ultimate disruptive technology, and it has changed the landscape of television forever. And they did try to pass a law that controls what can be on the internet, as far as, right, like television, you can't show, you can't have pornography. And so they tried to do something similar for the internet, but that wasn't working out. I'll talk more about that. There is tort liability. So that's something that's going to come up in some of the readings. When it talks about tort liability, tort law sounds like a dessert or something. Tort law means the law, that's the law that you use when you sue someone. So if someone is liable under tort law, if someone is legally liable, it means maybe the government won't hold them responsible, but someone else could sue them. And in that way, it's still a kind of government regulation. Someone is using the government, the courts, in order to regulate and make sure, that this isn't on the internet, right? So tort liability, lawsuits basically are a kind of regulation, and it has affected the internet in the past. The Communications Decency Act is what I was just referring to before. The Communications Decency Act was, so they tried to pass this, and it was about pornography and content on the internet, and it did not pass. But Section 230 of the CDA, the Communications Decency Act, did pass. Section 230 says that internet platforms, basically social networks, back then it was like a chat rooms, a company, a website that hosts a chat room. Now it's more like social media companies and apps, social media platforms. Section 230 says that they are immune from liability. So you don't have, let me see here. You don't have liability if under Section 230, meaning this social media company or this website that hosted a chat room, it couldn't be sued because of something that someone went on their chat room or network and said, right? They can't be sued for that. The reason that they did this was, the reason why this passed when the rest of the Communications Decency Act did not pass, was that it actually encouraged them to try to police the content, to try to remove negative content or things that nobody wanted on there. Removing pornography, for example, removing hate speech, right? That's a common thing that companies want to remove from their platforms. And now today we would say remove that fake news because it's problematic. Well, the thing is, when they were still liable under tort law, they were afraid to remove anything. They were getting sued if they didn't remove something that someone said if they didn't remove the comment. So then they would try to remove something, and then they were sued if they removed one thing but didn't remove another thing. So their content moderation practices, and that's what we're talking about, content moderation. their practices for moderating the content on their websites, they were afraid to do anything. So they just said, you know what, we don't remove anything. So we're not responsible for what people say on our website. And what Section 230 did was it said, look, you're not going to be sued if you remove something, and you're not going to be sued if you don't remove something. So just clean up your website. You know, Section 230 allowed them to clean up their website, remove pornography, remove hate speech without worrying about being sued by people who didn't like the way that they moderated their content. So it gives them the power to moderate their content as they see fit. This is immunity from liability. They can't be sued. Another big idea that is in the news or has been in recent years has to do with net neutrality laws. So just briefly, this is a form of regulation for the internet. It went through the FCC through a presidential directive, or it was pushed by the Obama administration, right? So presidential administrations, they appoint commissioners to the, or they appoint chairman of the FCC. Maybe not exactly right about that, but I don't think that I don't know if they appoint everyone or if they only appoint the chairman. But under the Obama administration, we had net neutrality laws that the FCC passed, and it's basically it's a regulation of the internet that said it's regulating ISPs, or internet service providers, saying that they had to treat all data the same. So they couldn't charge a big company like Google and Netflix more money for taking up a lot of bandwidth with the big data packets for streaming movies and things like that. And the idea there, some said it was because they wanted to, it was because of these big companies pushing for that, because they didn't want to be charged more. But the idea also is that these internet service providers would then not have too much power as far as creating fast lanes, charging consumers extra money for access to certain websites, creating like cable packages, and actually discouraging innovation and competition, creating a monopoly where they could enter the streaming video field with their own website and have an advantage because they also controlled the data field, the data streams, and everything like that, and they controlled bandwidth. So there were a lot of reasons to think net neutrality was beneficial. Well, recently the FCC repealed it, and people were saying this is a terrible thing. It's going to allow the ISPs to do all of these negative things, and it's going to give them too much power. So this is a kind of an idea of regulating the internet. It's something that has happened in the past. We've had regulations to the internet in the past. Section 230 is a regulation of the internet. It's just a regulation. It's a law that says, look, there shouldn't be many laws that get in the way of these social media platforms doing cleaning up their own websites. Okay, so some issues that are related to Section 230, because this is really at the core of our topic about whether or not the government should be more involved with content moderation. Section 230 says they shouldn't be. Section 230 says these platforms can do whatever they want with content moderation, and they're not liable. The government can't tell them what to do. They can't tell them how to moderate content. The government, people can't sue them for how they moderate content, right? So because of that, because some people aren't happy with the way that these websites moderate their content, some people say that Section 230 should be repealed and it should be gotten rid of, right? We've seen that having the immunity from liability actually encourages that content moderation rather than discouraging it. It allows them to do it when they were liable. It had this effect where they didn't want to even moderate their own content. Or it would have the opposite effect. Some have argued that they would be really strict about moderating content because they want to make sure they don't get sued. So they'd be very strict about moderating content. And then some people worry that would have the effect of, again, chilling speech, where people don't even want to express themselves online anymore because it's such a pain. Everything gets censored so much. Some have argued that these platforms have the power to censor speech, and it makes it an infringement on our freedom of speech. They compare social media to like the modern public square. Where do we go to express our opinions now and to reach people? It's in it's not in the public square. We don't go out on the street and try to yell at people. No, we go online to yell at people, right? A lot of this, like before, like defining fake news, a lot of this is a matter of definition. Is social media like a public square? Is it more like uh, a public forum where you can express yourself, one of the only public forums we have? Or is it more like a publisher? Should they be defined as a publisher, someone who decides what gets published and what does not on their platform? This is something that social media companies have been struggling with, whether they should be considered a publisher. If they're a publisher, then they're liable for what they allow on their platform. And it's not just a platform where anyone can say what they want. And that would mean they don't get the protection of Section 230. If they're like a public square, then that would mean that taking away someone's right to voice their opinion in the public square would mean that they're infringing on their freedom of speech, right? And some people say they're partisan. They're like uh, more likely to kick someone off who is of one side of the political spectrum than another. And so some would say that they are censoring voices that are conservative or liberal, depending on the platform. Now, the other side of this argument would say that, well, not really the other side. Some would say, some who also want Section 230 repealed would say that these platforms aren't doing enough to moderate or prevent the hate speech or fake news. So the government should be in charge rather than them, or that they should have oversight. Their Section 230, they shouldn't have complete power over what they remove from their websites. It needs to be fair, right? To make sure that people's freedom of speech is not infringed on. Well, the opposing view to that would be that if the government were involved, then it really is a First Amendment issue, because the First Amendment says that governments are not allowed to abridge free speech. And so if the government was telling social media companies what they could and couldn't put on there, what they could and couldn't allow, what content should be moderated or removed, then essentially the government is censoring speech. And then that would be really would be an infringement on the freedom of speech, right? So like I said something about our president, right? Something unflattering about our president. And then the president's administration put pressure on that social media company to remove any unflattering things about him because they are treasonous or something like that. That's a word our president likes to throw around. So then it really would be infringing on freedom of speech, right? And it wouldn't be the social media company so much as it would be the government that's trying to put pressure on them, or they've made a law that says you have to moderate content in this way, or moderate content according to what we say, how we say it should be. So this is the big concern and the big debate about policing online speech. So there has been a recent development just in the last few months during the pandemic. The New York Times did an expose of, this was earlier in the spring semester. The New York Times did an expose of child sexual abuse imagery and how much it has spread online. I'm just going to link that. Let me see here. That's the laser pointer. Let's see here. I don't know if I have opened that or not. Okay, so this it's a very well put together, and it was kind of an explosive piece on the New York Times where it's saying last year tech companies reported, again, it's about technology companies, internet companies reported 45 million online photos and videos of children being sexually abused. And as you scroll down, they start to pop up. Each image shown here documents a crime. The photos are in a format analysts devised to protect the abused. 20 years ago, the online images were a problem. 10 years ago, an epidemic. Now the crisis is at a breaking point. The internet is overrun with images of child sexual abuse. What went wrong? Now, this expose made it clear that move that. This expose made it clear that it's a bigger problem than some people know, and it also made it clear that encryption, which is what a lot of tech companies are moving toward, a lot of online companies, because people are concerned about privacy and having their private information protected from the government or from you know, the companies themselves. A lot of them are promoting this idea of end-to-end encryption, you know, so that people can't spy on your stuff online, on your interactions online. And that article made it clear that if, for example, Facebook Messenger, a lot of the images were shared via Facebook Messenger, and if it was to switch to encryption, which is it was going to become encrypted, then suddenly there would be very few of these images being caught and reported, and it's a big problem, obviously. So recently we had another law that was proposed. This was during the pandemic. It's called the Earn It Act. This is an acronym, but the Earn It Act, it actually is saying that social media platforms, social media companies will not have the protection of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act unless they earn it. So again, it's the idea of taking away the Section 230 protections and then telling these social media companies what they have to do about content moderation. Specifically, they need to prove that they're taking certain measures to stop the spread of child sexual abuse imagery online in order to have their immunity from liability under Section 230. Well, some say is the first step to getting rid of Section 230 and the government telling websites how they moderate content, which could lead to telling them how to moderate content with, for example, fake news, which could lead to the government deciding what is fake news and what is not, and what gets removed and what doesn't, and what you can say online and what you can't. Others also say that this Earn It Act is actually the government that is, they want to make sure that encryption doesn't happen because they like to spy on their own citizens, something that Edward Snowden revealed. So that's kind of a different topic itself, but that's another big a big objection to the Earn It Act and what it's doing. So close that. This shows you that, again, this is a problem right now. Also, if as of last summer, our president was threatening to get rid of Section 230 if these companies aren't doing more and doing better to be more fair, because he thinks that they're not being fair to conservative voices in their content moderation. it is a question of what should be done. Should these companies still be in charge of their own content moderation? Should the government be involved? Would that be more of a problem if the government were to be involved? Would it involve what's called collateral censorship? This is a term uh, in uh, in one of our readings, collateral censorship. Even if it's the social media company who is removing speech, removing posts that say something um, that's unpopular or whatever it is, if they're doing it because the government is threatening them that they'll lose their liability if they don't remove stuff like that, well, then that's the same as the government telling you you can't say that. And that's this idea of collateral censorship. And if they're getting more and more strict about what you can and can't say online, is it going to just discourage people from expressing themselves online? Is this abridging our freedom of speech in some ways? So this is a very political issue. It's a very big current event, a current issue and debate as we move through this coronavirus era and go into the 2020 election, where we're going to see uh, more of an issue probably with content moderation and what is removed and what isn't online. So hopefully this is helpful to you. Let me stop my screen share. Hopefully this gives you more of an idea of what this topic is about, since I can't be in class with you, right, talking about each reading that we do. Um, we have 3 readings this week. The first 2 are for longer, like they're like 70-page articles, but I'm only asking you to read a 10 to 20-page section of them. And I've chosen those sections for specific reasons because they talk about communications Decency Act Section 230, or because they talk about reasons for regulating the internet, worries over, consumer safety and consumer harms, or uh, election engineering and things like that. And then the third one is really right on topic, which is it's from a source I don't really care for, the Cato Institute, which is it's almost always biased in against the idea of government. Uh, Government involvement or government regulation of industry at all, but it makes a pretty sound argument here, and it brings up reasons why some people would say social media content moderation should be regulated, and then it argues against all of those reasons. So that's the third source is really going to be a useful source in making your argument this time. So hopefully that's helpful. Make sure that you read the instructions, read the articles this week, engage in discussion on the discussion forums, where I have specific discussion questions that really will guide you through each of these somewhat challenging readings.